Well, first of all, good afternoon. Let me start the presentation. Can you see the screen, by the way?
Yeah, but it's not full screen.
Yes.
Yep,
No,
now it's
should
good.
be. Yeah. So my name is Olivier Schätzle. I'm a project manager, or I think now we even say project officer at the grants office of Institut Pasteur, which means that my role is to accompany researchers to build projects and aiming at obtaining fundings. And I'm specialized on European grants. So this presentation will be very much tainted towards Europe, but I will address general concepts. So this is module 2, which means that you had a module 1 some time ago, together with my colleague Xenia, who focused very much on the art of writing. I will go into different aspects today. So, namely project design. This will be more coming back to the concept of what a project is. I will talk a little bit about how to draft a budget and the points to have in mind. It's a vast project. It's a vast topic, and usually you should have your grants office involved because it can be very different depending on the funders. But I will address a few points, and I will finish talking about communication, dissemination, exploitations, words of the European jargon about outreach, and giving you some context and definitions there. So let's start with project design and what a project is actually. So if you make a Wikipedia search, you will get different definitions, and two of them are any undertaking carried out individually or collaboratively and possibly involving research or design that is carefully planned to achieve a particular aim. And another definition that is a bit more managerial is a set of interrelated tasks to be executed over a fixed period and within certain costs and other limitations. So when I read those definitions, there's a number of keywords that ring a bell to me. The first one is aim, carefully planned, interrelated tasks, fixed periods, costs and other limitations. So basically, for a project, you need to ask yourself a number of questions, like what do you want to achieve, aim, objectives, what do you need to achieve it, what do you need to do to achieve it, so the interrelated tasks, and what do you need to do all these activities, so the time, the manpower, and other resources. And usually that's what you ask in a grant, basically. And the funder will define certain of those aspects, like the topic you can be funded on, or how long the project can be, and also how much money you can ask for, and how you can spend it. Basically, this is really the outline of what a project is. And if I put that on a scheme, you have a time frame that is defined, you have a starting point, which is the state of the art, and you have an objective. And you need to build a set of tasks that will lead you from the start to the end. So the key message is that a project is a carefully planned succession of tasks, and there's different conceptual tools that can help you build a convincing project. So we're going to take some time to talk about work packages, tasks, deliverables, milestones, PERT, and Gantt charts. So to do that, I designed a fictional fake project just to help think about it. So in this hypothetical project, my objective is to create a predictive model to anticipate risks of epidemics for a new bacterial disease and to better inform policymakers. So that's very much influenced by the current situation, as you can imagine. And in this project, there's a number of things I need to do. So I need to sample my bacteria. I need to involve a friend that works with artificial intelligence to make this model. I need to collect data from hospitals, and putting all this together, I want to come up with a list of actions for policymakers. So that's the very rough idea of how I want my project to be. And for this, I will need to define work packages. So as I just showed you, a project is a succession of tasks, but in most cases, it's going to be more complicated than 3 tasks following each other. Usually it looks like something a bit more complicated and that highly depend on the complexity of your project and the number of people involved typically. But the key idea is that you will organize your tasks in work packages. So if I come back to my hypothetical project, for instance, there's going to be a work package dedicated to the sampling and characterization with tasks that I named collecting samples, characterizing samples, and sequencing the samples. There's going to be another work package dedicated to the artificial intelligence. So in there, we'll need to build the basic algorithm. I will need to train the algorithm with deep learning, and I will need to validate it before with real samples. A third work package would be linked with the epidemiology. So the task will be collecting hospital data, compiling the data with environmental and socio-economical data, and elaborate risk profiles. And putting all this together in a fourth work package to come up with a predictive model where I bring the AI prediction and I elaborate a list of actions. So as you can see, I organized the different tasks that would need to be done in such project in groups of tasks called work packages. And very typically, especially for Europe, you will have other activities that would be imposed, such as communication or management. And within your project structures, you will have to define deliverables and milestones. So usually those are very confusing concepts to researchers. I will try to get you to grasp them. But they are tools to monitor the progress of the project. They should give the reviewer, they should guide the reviewer through your work plan and show that the goals that you want to achieve are reachable. And basically, deliverables are tangible or intangible objects produced as a result of the project that is intended to be delivered to a stakeholder, either internal or external. It's the result of the process. And milestones are a bit trickier to understand. It's mostly a project management tool, I would say, and it serves as measuring the progress towards the output, and it's really a flag in your work plan. It helps define whether you're on a good track or not, and whether you need to make a change to your work plan. Because it's very silent right now, we'll do a bit of a quiz. Can you just confirm that you're here? I'm addressing mostly the PhD students, but anybody is free to respond.
We are here.
You're here. Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna challenge you a bit, and I'm gonna ask you if each object on this list is either a milestone or a deliverable, and I'll like you to tell me, basically. So how about a project management guide? What would that be? No idea? Okay,
it's a deliverable.
Yes. Thank you, Deshmukh.
Okay, the PhD candidates,
The PhDs,
come on, say
Yes.
something.
I know all the answers.
We'll see, but take risks. I mean, most people make mistakes, and I might even make some myself. So what about a project flyer? Would that be a deliverable or a milestone? I have to interrogate people personally.
What do you mean by project flyer, anyway?
Like a brochure or
Is that neither?
neither?
I don't know.
So that would usually be a deliverable on typically on a communication work package, for instance. You would probably tell the funder, okay, by month 6 we will have produced flyers to communicate about the projects typically. So typically a flyer would be a deliverable. It's tangible. It's something you can actually deliver. And what about validation of biomarkers?
Milestone.
Yes. Can you explain why?
But I guess if you validate biomarkers, then you can do some experiment. So that's the moment when you can or cannot do some experiment or something like that.
Yes, very good. That's exactly this. So it's really this flag in the project. If you manage to validate your biomarkers, you might go on with the work plan as you defined it. But if you didn't, then you need to find out of plan B, basically. And usually this means either spending more time on the validation or finding other readily available biomarkers, whatever. But you need to make a decision that will alter the rest of the work plan. What about report on validation of stratification markers?
Deliverable?
A deliverable. A report is typically a deliverable. What about digital tool for data acquisition?
Maybe there can be both.
Yeah, very good. It's actually not clear enough. So it could be a deliverable, but it could also be a milestone. Like if you don't have it, you cannot acquire data, and then you're stuck. So what about the management framework in place with someone else responding? Okay, I see people
Let's
answering.
ask Andela. Come on, say something.
But it was Andela that was responding so far.
And Angela, yes, I was replying until now, so I will stay quiet for at the end of the game.
No, but I see people responding in the chat. They must be shy or having a microphone failure. So we were at management framework in place, and Sophie Marie responded milestone. That's right. And we can go on with the list. First study subject approval package. I don't even understand it myself, but I would say deliverable on this one. And so you get the idea. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but recruitment of first 100 patients in the study, that would be a milestone. A dissemination plan would be a deliverable typically. Usually a mandatory deliverable for European projects. So for my coming back to my fictional projects, I decided to define a few milestones deliverables. So the first one would be the collection of the samples. If I don't have the samples, I cannot really go on. And I would probably write a report on what I found about those samples, and those would be deliverable. This would be a deliverable. For the work package 2, I would have to produce the code for the algorithm. This could be a deliverable. And the validation of the algorithm would be a milestone. And for the epidemiology work package. The collection of data would also be a milestone, while reports on risk profiles could be a deliverable. And at the very end of the project, I would come up with really what was the objective, the list of action, and that would be a deliverable. Do you have questions so far about this, or is it very clear?
Yeah, Olivier, just maybe take 2 minutes so that they can ask questions if you if you have questions via the chat or just on your mic, it's fine as well. Thanks. If you do not have questions, then if it's all clear, just let us know.
I have one question. I was wondering why you choose to label in work package 2 the milestone as M3.
That's something you'll see probably in a couple of slides. That would be linked with the chronology.
Okay,
So you
not
see,
linked to the package number.
No. It's really, so the first one would be the sampling. So first I need to collect the sample. So it's really the chronology. I would have the samples collected before the data are collected, and the AI validation would come after. So it's more a time perspective. So we have a question in the chat. So as you are writing a proposal, you can divide the application physically into work package to make it easier to follow, or this is more thematic to make the chronology easier to understand? So I guess what you mean here is more what a work package is actually. It's
Yeah.
I'm trying to understand the question.
Yeah, if maybe I can answer this. Maybe if I've understood it correctly, Olivier, of course.
Yes.
Cody, this is the aim of submitting a proposal. You have no other way to show the evaluator what you want to do in the project. So as Olivier said, you have the title of your project and you have planned to do this, to at the end come up with a list for policymakers. So in all the projects, you have your science state of the art, you introduce, etc. This is fine. And then you have to show how you will implement what you have said before. So you have no other option than to organize what you have said and what you want to achieve in tasks. So I think I replied to your question, but if I didn't understand correctly, please say so.
And to add to that, regarding the chronology, the work package themselves, they do not give you an idea of the chronology. There's a different tool that I will address in a couple of slides that would that shows the chronology of the project. This is more packages of tasks that have the same the same logic. And so they're really bundled together to make it clear for the reviewer.
If I may add, it has now become a standardized way to describe projects. So this is a norm to have those terms: work package, deliverables, milestone, and so on. So at the beginning, the first part of your question, do you divide the application physically? Yes. This is how physically you will do it. That gives you the idea of the things that are packages. And then who will evaluate it? The reviewer of the people giving you the money, because they don't just give you the money, they also want to review you from time to time. And that's where you need to make the whole thing readable. And again, to the second part of your question, that is also true. You need to organize it so that chronologically it is easier to be understood by the reviewer. So you need to think of both aspects.
So just I'm asking a question then to Deshmukh. So you mean when you're reporting about your research, so not necessarily to get funding, you also organize it the same way? That's what you're saying. Yeah.
It's like a Russian doll approach. You have to see the big doll and then line the medium one, the small and the small one, so it looks like in a progression, and yet they all connect physically. You cannot mix it. I mean, you could, but it will not make sense. So it's a good way to think of projects as how would you call that mathematically, in a fractal way. The small scale is represented in the big scale, in the same symmetry. If I am clear about this.
Yeah.
That's why I was puzzled about the M3, because if you go into 1.1, 1.2, 1.3 in work package 1, then you would have milestone 1, D1, D2, and then for work package 2, they will all start with D2, 2.1, M2.1, and so on.
So the norm I used is really the one for the European projects. It might be different depending on the funders, but usually deliverables are numbered like this. So the first digit is linked with the work package, and the second digit is like the number of the deliverable. While for the milestone, it's really in a chronological order. But that doesn't really matter. It's really the concept that that is important there. So if there's no more question, I can go to the next concepts. So there's two other words that you might read about when you start looking for grants too.
I had a small question. I had a problem with the microphone.
Yes, please.
So these milestones, they also have to be written in the project. Like when you describe the work package and when you describe the tasks, you also have to mention this will be my milestone.
Yes.
Okay.
Typically. It's also very important if you because you will also have to write something usually about risk assessment. And typically milestones are good tools to think about your risk assessment. So for instance, if M1 is not reached, so if I say at month 6 all the samples will be collected, but if finally at month 6 I didn't collect them, then I have a problem, and I have to. It means I cannot go on with the characterization and the sequencing. So that's one of the consequences, and I need to decide how to go further. So it can be I will dedicate more time in collecting the samples, but this time dedicated to collecting more samples will most likely have to come from somewhere else. So I might have to reduce the importance of another task, or I might need to just decide, okay, I didn't collect all the samples, but I will anyway go on with. So it's a milestone is a moment of decision in your project, and it helps you to make the risk assessment also.
Thank you.
So in short, yes, you need to you will have to define them in the project. Other concepts that come in the writing of grants are the ones of PERT charts and Gantt charts. Basically, they are tools to help you visualize the project. And the first one, the PERT chart, it helps you display the information as a network model. This one is a bit complicated, the example here, but basically it's how your work packages are working together, and the flow of information between work packages. I will give you an example based on the fake project just after. A Gantt chart is a visual representation of the schedule of the project. So it's really how the tasks that you defined will be spread over the duration of the project. So more precisely on the per chart, it's like a flow chart that shows the flow of information between work packages. So if I take my example, the work package 1 sampling and characterization will feed the development of the artificial intelligence that will also feed the predictive model. While the same for the epidemiology work package, the information coming out of this one will go towards work package 4 to come up with the final deliverables. And you can also see that the results of each work package will also feed a work package that was not clearly defined, but that is the one about communication, dissemination, and exploitation, which is usually one that is imposed by funders, or anyway, you need to communicate about your project. So each work package will give information for this one also. That's the per chart. And the Gantt chart, it's really like a timetable. And if we take the one I made for this fictional project, you can see that this project is scheduled over 4 years. The 2 first years, there will be work done on the first work packages, with the first milestone coming at the end of the first year, and the deliverable at the end of the second year. And that's why it's M1, M2, and M3. So it's really when will you work on which bits of your project, and will you allocate enough time? This really gives. This is in general a very important tool, I think, when you're thinking about a project. This will give you the idea of, is it realistic to do everything I'm planning, or should I do more? Should I do less? So this is, I think, for me as a project manager, is probably the most useful tool.
Okay.
Just reading what Johan wrote. Yeah. So.
Yeah, someone asked, Cody, I think, asked, can you change the deliverables or milestones? I don't know what you mean, Cody. Can you say during the writing of the project, or when the project is already funded?
I think from what I understood is when the project is being reviewed. And that's why I said no. It's not possible. But if the project is funded, they might ask you to add a deliverable, or to remove one, or to add a milestone. This is often the case with European funded projects. A milestone which often they might ask you to add is something on ethics, because when you submit the project, sometimes you don't have the authorization to do a specific work, but you will get it after a few months if the project is accepted. So if I stay within my logic about a European funded project, they can ask you often to add a deliverable. But during the review, no, you have to wait for them to come back to you.
Okay. So do you have other questions related to this part of what I did so far, and really the project design? So if we summarize, I just gave you definitions so far of different tools that can be used to elaborate a project. So organizing your tasks in work packages, defining deliverables and milestones, and using graphical tools such as the Gantt chart or per chart to show how your project is organized. So if that's clear to you, I will go on the next bit, which is about drafting a budget and what to have in mind. As a disclaimer, it's it's well, basically every funder is different, so it's difficult to make a very general course on costs, because every costs are not, yeah, every costs are not eligible depending on the funders. So you need to really check what are the rules for each funders. So for instance, if you go to EMBO to apply for a fellowship, they will only allow personal costs for your contract. So you will not put like consumables and other things. So that's the important message, is that every funder is different. So you really need to look into the rules there and get in touch with your favorite grants office. So for one example, the easiest example, which is one that you're likely to go to, the postdoctoral fellowship from the Marie Curie program, and this is basically the easiest one because it's all automatic and it's gonna just be proportional to your to the number of months that the project will last, and it's already defined, and it's a very easy one, but it's not always like this. So there's typically two things to have in mind. Two main categories of costs, I would say. I leave my colleagues to correct me if I'm saying horrible things, but basically there's the personal costs and what I would call the other direct costs, which can be consumable, travel, equipment, services, anything. The few points I want you to have in mind are related to the personal costs. So the first one is that there's an important concept that is not always grasped by researcher, which is the concept of person months. Basically, a person month is an amount of effort to conclude a task expressed in months. For example, one person full-time for 1 month equals 1 person month. Two persons working 50% each for 1 month also equals 1 person month. Did I lost you already, or do you follow?
Yeah, I think the concept might be a bit hard to understand, but please, we can take a few minutes here if you want to ask questions. Okay, that's not clear for me. Okay, Olivier.
Okay. So the 1 person a person month is really just a unit of showing how much effort in terms of time spent on the task. So for instance, if it takes you 1 month if it takes 1 person 1 month to achieve something, then it would take 1 person month. But I'm just repeating myself here.
Yeah,
If
okay, sorry.
Yeah, please say something, Johan.
No, I just it's because when you have a project, you're going to spend time in that project. That's why you're asking to be funded, you know. And you have different kinds of projects, obviously, depending on the funders and all. So in our case, we have focused on grants where you can which you can already submit as soon as you finish your PhD. Maybe not, I mean, the starting, you must wait a bit. So the most common one is, for example, Marie Curie fellowships. This you need to spend 100% of your time. So you will not ask any question. For example, if you are doing a Marie Curie, you are doing it, you have to spend 100% of your time on it, and your project lasts 24 months. So you are going to spend 24 person month on the project. That's the simplest one. Have I lost you, or do you get this part? Cody? That makes sense. Yes. And now if we go to like another type of project, because Olivier will talk a bit more about the JCJC, because this is funded by the National Funding Agency in France. And it's also a fellow, I mean, now it's not a fellowship, it's actually a project which young postdocs can actually go for. And in this kind of project, you have different types of duration. You have 24 months, 36 months, 42 months. Okay, so it's a bit more complicated because in this one, it's not a direct fellowship, but you're going to hire people to do a bigger kind of project. And in this kind of project, if we stay in a JCJC lasting 36 months, for example, in no case you can put 100% of your time, because the evaluator will say, what happens if you do not get this project? Are you fired? No, right? Because to go for it, you already need to be employed. So that's why Olivier is trying to tell you that if we go for the JCJC lasting 36 months, you are advised to show that you are involved in a significant way in the project. That's why you have to spend 60% of your time minimum on this project. So basically, to get the person month, you take 60%, you multiply by 36 months. It will give you your involvement in person month. And why we talk about person month? Because when you will draft the budget, later on, Olivier will talk a bit more about this, you will put personnel by person month, because you will need the monthly salary. I will stop here if it's not clear, and then Olivier can complete.
Well, I see that Johan has all kind of expectation of what what we'll present the next, but yeah, typically it's the person months is really something that is, I would say, more relevant in collaborative projects when you have several people involved and you need to quantify really the amount of time that will be spent on each tasks and so on. So for you, probably for the next grants you'll be involved in, it will be simple because it might be only you if you're going for a Marie Curie fellowship, for instance, or any fellowship. If you're going for more advanced kind of grants, like a starting grant, an ERC starting grant, or a JCJC, then you will have to manipulate a bit more those concepts of time. And as I wrote down there, is that there's different time implications. Some funders will require the principal investigator to spend more or less time on the project. So on a fellowship, typically you're supposed to spend your entire time on it, so 100%. For an ERC starting grant, they will ask that you spend at least 50% of your time on it. And also recognizing that you might have other activities that you want to spend time on. And as Johan was pointing out, for the JCJC, they recommend 60% of time on it. Another important concept about personal cost is that you need to really take into account the employer cost. When you look at your salary, you know your gross, you know your net, but this is actually not what you cost to your employer. You cost more, and if you want to apply for a grant and pay for personal costs, you need to take this number into account. So, for instance, if you look at the salary grid of Institut Pasteur, there's a lot of lines. It's complicated, but focus on this one. This would be the gross salary, yearly gross salary. But the actual cost for Institut Pasteur is this line. So typically for a PhD, first year PhD student, he will see his gross salary of 30,000 euro per year, but he will actually cost 44,000 euros. So this is an important concept to keep in mind when you're building your budget, typically. And a third important concept when you're building your budgets is the concept of overheads. So it's also called indirect costs. In French, they call it sometimes frais de gestion. And basically those are the costs that are related to the day-to-day running of the operation, but that are not like specifically mentioned in your project. So it's going to be the electricity, the rent, the secretaries. I put myself also typically. So all the services that you use daily to do your work, they are not all taken into account in your project. You probably will not start putting the salary of your secretary or even the electricity bill. So that's why funders allow different amounts for overheads. So typically the European Commission allow 25% for indirect costs. The INR, it's 8%, if I'm not mistaken. And what you need to keep in mind is that this counts towards the maximum grant allowed. So what this means is that if you only allowed, for instance, to ask for 1 million euro, it's not like you will build your budget until you reach 1 million euro and add 25% on top of it. No, it has to be taken into account. Is that clear so far, or did I lose everybody?
So the extra cost for the personnel that you described before, that if the gross salary is 30K, and that the employer will be spending 44K, the 14K difference is for national contributions.
Yes,
it is not something that is being that is of cost to the institute. You have to pay retirement, you have to pay whatever cost of social security and so on. That's incompressible for France. That's the charge patronale. But then on top of that, 44%, to manage someone at Pasteur, who issues the ID, who runs the email for that person, and so on, that costs Pasteur some amount. However, you cannot just say, you could say it costs Pasteur exactly that amount, but the EU allows up to 25% to be counted for this kind of management. So what does that mean then? That means that if you specify the exact amount, will that be better than specifying the top limit? What would you recommend?
Well, I doubt you would easily evaluate it.
For example, the ANR has 8%, but we know that at Pasteur, it may cost up to 12% to run someone's project. So then you are in deficit.
But that would probably depend on the funders. So I mean, if you would start writing down like pens or tables or desks,
rental of computers and mice,
that might not be eligible depending on the kind of funders and the kind of projects. So honestly, the way we operate, we don't really we don't look at at whether it's an option to actually evaluate the actual overheads. And I know that in the past it used to be the case for Europe, at least you could declare your actual overhead, but it was a nightmare, and it needs to be validated and so on. It's very complicated. So yes, typically organizations have more than 25% in the indirect costs, but that's what is available basically.
And depending on the funder, therefore, this is stated somewhere when you look at a grant application, or you have to read, or you have to ask the grant office about it, because you guys know this every day. Well, how to know that?
Well, usually it's stated. I cannot speak in the name of all the different funders. I would know only the European and the very roughly the national one, but it is stated somewhere, and of course the grants office will help you navigate through it if you do not find it. Anyway, you should involve the grants office wherever you're going to build budget and so on, just to be sure of the different and to be aware of the different rules that apply, because there's sometimes also internal rules that are to be taken into account.
So
Yeah.
for students and postdocs requesting a fellowship from ARC or FRM, sometimes the total amount is already stated on their website. It says for this fellowship you will be given, I don't know, 70,000 euro.
Yeah.
Then the person writing the application should remember, if Pasteur will remove 12% from that for management, this is the number of months left that they can actually work and get paid for.
Okay, Deshmukh, because what you're mentioning is different, because it's really fellowships. And the ARC and La Ligue, LNCC, etc., it's really specific. So if we stay within the collaborative projects, like Olivier said, when you go for it, you should always check the financial guidelines. It will be written about the overhead rates, and sometimes it's also written that for this guideline, you cannot have, for example, subcontracting or other categories, or equipment is not eligible. So all these are really in the financial guidelines.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's it really depends on the funder typically. So this is to give you a rough idea of the things to take into account. So overheads, earlier the actual employer's costs, and also as Johan was just mentioning, the other costs can be anything. Consumable equipment, subcontracting, and so on. But this is also very much funder specific, so you need to check before what's eligible or not. For instance, for the European grants, typically most of the technological platforms from Institut Pasteur are not eligible in a straight way. So that's why I summarize this in very very rough numbers. I can, if you want, I can show you an example of a budget. Do you see my Excel?
Can you zoom in?
Make it bigger.
So this is just to show you a bit the different categories. So this would be, for instance, for an ERC, so European Research Council grant. You, if you don't know about them, they're probably the most prestigious ones. I start with the starting grant that you'll be eligible when you'll be 2 to 7 years after your defense. And typically for a starting grant, you can ask up to 1.5 million. And for this, you need just to fill in the different categories. So you will have to evaluate in terms of personnel how much you're going to spend on it. So if you are going to have like 60, I'm just hoping that yes, it calculates automatically. So you could have like 1 year of say a technician on your project, or for a postdoc, typically it's 55,000 euro per year for a postdoc between 3 and 5 years post PhD. You could evaluate that you would have like 2 postdoc for 3 years, so that would be 6 years. You would build it like this, and so on. The reason I was showing it to you is to show you that in this table, it calculates directly the indirect costs, so the overheads we just talked about, and it counts towards your total. So on top of this, you would have travel cost, equipment. So equipment would have like specific rules also, and equipment is usually defined as an object that would be depreciated. So basically, you do not declare the whole cost to the funder, but you declare the annual depreciation costs. So, for instance, a piece of equipment that would be depreciated over 5 years, you would declare every year only 20%. That's already a bit advanced, let's say, and I don't want to drown you with details, but roughly, this is a bit how you make your budget. You define how much consumables. You can also put, for the EU, you can put the open access fees. Typically, there's audit costs. So all of this to take into account. It will always depend on the funder. It will depend on on your host institution, on their own accounting rules, and so on. And so those are things that you will have to see either with us if you're planning to apply to Institut Pasteur with any grant, or to your host, to your future host, and discuss with them what rules are applying there. So that was really roughly on the budget. Do you have questions related to the budget? Nope. And Johan, did I miss something in budget drafting? Would you add something?
No, you have even used a more complicated budget for the ERC. It's fine. I mean, for me, it's fine. But then if the PhD candidates do not have any questions, basically you just have to keep in mind that you have to read the financial guidelines to know also how much is the maximum funding sometimes for more advanced projects, and then they will state how much is the maximum, what are the overheads, what is allowed and what is not allowed. And the categories which Olivier has shown you, it's all the categories which are eligible in many cases. But then sometimes for specific funders, they might say, for example, that equipment is not eligible. So take-home message is really, before when you want to go for a proposal or something, read also the financial guidelines. And if you have any questions, you ask the grants office. That's it.
Very good. Always ask the grant office. So the last bit of today's module will be about the communication, dissemination, and exploitation. So those are terms used a lot in the European jargon of project proposals. I will try to clarify a bit what they mean. So to start with, communication. Communication is the general activity of reaching out to society as a whole. That's how they define it. And the purpose for the European Commission is to demonstrate how the EU fundings are contributing to tackling societal challenges. So basically, it's to show how we're using the EU fund and every European citizen's taxes, basically, and in practice, it's communicating about the project to a broad audience. By opposition to dissemination, dissemination is really about making the results of a project public and to the people that can best make use of them. So it's dissemination is really about results and getting those results to the audience that can use them and maximize the impact. And there's another term, so exploitation. This is really about using the results. And I will make it a bit clearer after. But typically, if you patent results, or if the results you obtain in a project lead to a product, that would be exploitation. It's really translating the result into something concrete in the real world. And really to summarize, communication is informing about projects and results. Dissemination is describing and making results available for use. And exploitation is about making use of results. So because I'm alone to talk for some time, no, the quiz comes later. There's gonna be a quiz, spoiler. This is another way to look at it. So it's the timeline of the project, a bit like I showed you earlier. And basically, you can communicate about your projects from the start of your project till the end. But exploitation and dissemination really start when you start having results. But it can go beyond the duration of the project, typically. So, of course, if we're talking about a European project where you have an obligation to communicate, disseminate, and exploit, you will really only do it during the duration of the project, maybe a bit later till you finalize the last report. But the concept of exploitation and dissemination goes beyond the duration of the project. So, just for everybody not to fall asleep, I have here a number of items, and I'd like to ask you to tell me whether they're communication, dissemination, or exploitation, starting with a newsletter. So would you be able to tell me communication? Yes. Training? Training is a bit more tricky. I get dissemination, exploitation. I would say dissemination. And I would say it because that's in the example I found myself, that's under the category it was, but you can see that it's not always very clear. A license. Yes, exploitation, very typically. Demonstration. Your question marks are because you don't know, or because you do not know what the demonstration. So demonstration, typically, where I did my postdoc, we made a demonstrator, so a small unit of the technology to show to people how it works.
But then communication?
Actually, it was listed under dissemination. But you see, it's not always, Lenka is saying exploitation and com. It's not always very clear. Press release.
Communication.
Yes, that one is simple. A startup. Exploitation, yes. So and so on. So social media. Would be communication. Policy brief. It's an interesting one. I don't remember that.
That would be. Oops. That would mean to give advice to people who make policy based on your results?
Yes.
Then that might be exploitation?
I would say so. I was just checking, actually. So you see, it's not always straightforward. But anyway, I would say sometimes it can be both. I think it would be mostly dissemination in this case, because it's really about communicating an information, but it's not really about making use of results. You see, by position with like creating a startup or patenting. Patenting being exploitation. I just spoiled you the answer. So to finish a scientific publication, dissemination, yes, and a product would be exploitation. So those are a bit examples of items that that can fit into this. And now the real question is how do you build your own communication, dissemination, and exploitation plan? So those are a bit like my 50 cents on drafting this. It's not always easy. It's usually not the favorite section of researchers writing for the grants. They usually focus on really the science, but sometimes the impact and the communication around it is not where people spend the most energy. But basically, start by identifying your audience and be as specific as you can be. So you have big categories of audiences like policymakers, researchers, industry, patient advocacy groups, or general public. This is pretty standard, but when you write a proposal, really try to identify specifically who they will be. So if you're talking about policymakers, are you talking about the mayor of Paris, about the French Assembly, about European deputies?
So when we write the project, usually we have to address all three sections? Like they are asked to say, okay, what is your communication plan? What is your dissemination plan, and so on?
Yes, basically. So you will have to, yeah, you will have to address this, because you will your project will produce results. So to maximize the impact of your project, you need to make sure that those results are disseminated. And typically, dissemination is publication in journals and conferences. But because you need to convince also on the broad impact of your project, you need also to where possible show what will be your exploitation plan. So how will you make sure that your results can be used by people that can make them concrete in the real world? So for instance, if you're working on metabolic pathways linked with a disease, for instance, do you have a plan to get in touch with the pharmaceutical industries that might transform this into a drug for treatment? So it doesn't mean that you need to have the whole thing set from the very fundamental research to the name and the logo of the final product, but it means that you need to demonstrate that basically that your results will not just end up on a shelf and not being seen by anyone.
Okay, so in that sense, can exploitation plan be also the idea that your work can be used by other researchers?
Well, in this case, well, exploitation is usually more linked with like the private sector, so SMEs, startups, and so on. But for instance, you could present your results to a more end user oriented conference, for instance. That could be some. I will give some examples on it, but here the key message is to identify your audience and be specific. So not just put policymakers, but say exactly who and how you will reach out to them. And then the other thing is to identify the tools you will have access to, and making sure that you have the resource also to make them happen. So typically the tools that we see most of the time is our websites, press release, social media, posters, events, or video. I insist on the fact that when you draft a project, it's easy to promise all kind of things. If it gets granted, you will have to make them happen. So be sure of what you promise. This is something we regularly encounter when we manage projects. And so once you define your audience and the tools you will have access to, bring them together with a dedicated message per audience. So for instance, this is an example of an outreach plan we made for one of our projects, where basically we defined the audience, scientists. It could be more specific. I would make it more specific, like the specific community linked with your discipline. What the message is. Well, so here it's just communicate on the results of the project, and the communication tactics would be publication and scientific conference. Patient advocacy groups, they would inform them on progresses towards better care using websites, social media, newsletter, videos, and so on. So this is one of the steps of the drafting. Usually this comes later on. It comes usually when the project is granted, but I think it's useful to have this in mind of how you design the outreach plan. And once you have this set, you can put it on the timeline of your project. So for instance, you could say, okay, end of the first year, I will present to the International Conference on Infectious Disease Dynamics. So coming back to my hypothetical project, you could also say, and by the end of year 2, we'll produce a video presenting the project, so that would be used for broad audience and so on. And you could also present to an end user conference. That's what I was referring just before. So you address both the specialists, the broad audience, and more the private sector, let's say. So this is my 50 cents on how to design the outreach plan. And on top of this, you would add, like for instance, newsletter every X months. So I put X because it's really about finding out what you can really afford to do in the project. Don't put every 6 months, because it's gonna be a nightmare to keep up with. I would say every year, for instance, because as I said, everything you promise you'll have to do. But you can also include like press releases after each consortium meeting. That would be in the case of a collaborative project when you meet your partners. So you could, I don't know, make a press release or send a picture on Twitter. That kind of events. And to conclude, yeah, your communication plan will really depend on the grant and its size. So basically, depending on the resources that you will have. So as let's say you will apply for a fellowship, you will not have the same access to the same resources as if you would apply for a big collaborative project. So be realistic, and yeah, keep in mind that you will have to deliver if you get the grant. And one good trick is also to investigate with your host laboratory what they're doing already in terms of communication and outreach. So at Pasteur, for instance, you could find out about the Pasteur Don, or about open open science days, that kind of events that you could include in your proposal. I don't know if you have questions for this, because we're reaching the end of the presentation.
Can this part of the project, does this part of the project really affect if the project is getting accepted or not? Like this communication.
Yes, so I will only speak about the European Commission, but it's part of what's being evaluated. So for Europe, typically you usually have 3 sections in a proposal: excellence, which is your science; impact, which includes the communication and exploitation; and implementation. And they're clearly part of the evaluation. So if you would apply, for instance, to a Marie Curie fellowship, you would not be granted if you fail to be convincing on the impact section, because it's so competitive that you need to score also there. You wanted to say something, Johan?
Yes, it's compulsory. That's the take-home message. If you neglect this, you will not be granted. This is based on our experience. Yep. And sometimes it's clearly written, like in European projects, it's clearly written that it's mandatory. In other grants, it might not be written mandatory, but you will always have a section about this. Why is this important? Because for EU projects or even a lot of national funders, they use our money, meaning tax money, and you have seen that there's a deficit towards the public because they do not know what the researchers are doing with our money. And also this is now a big thing to really communicate to different type of audiences, especially the public as well. You should never forget this. Communicate to, vulgarize the science, use lay terms and all with social media to really communicate on your project, the outputs and the project as a whole and all. So it's really important, this part in your project.
Okay, so I mean, it's again me. I'm sorry if somebody else has a question. So you said excellence, that would be like judging a science and I don't know, innovativeness and so on. And the implementation would be how the project is written, in a sense, how it's planned, no?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes, so I didn't show the structure of a grant, but I could actually. Let me, because this is actually a perfect transition to my introduction to module 5. Implementing the lessons learned, typically. So you will get, by the end of the week, we will send you a template of the Marie Curie fellowships. Let me try to find it. Yes. You will receive this template, and you will see that it's divided in a bit fast in 3 sections: excellence, which is really about the science; the impact, which among other things is the dissemination and exploitation activities; and the quality and efficiency of the implementation. This is basically how you will organize your project in work packages and your Gantt chart, your everything I presented today, basically. So we will send you this template, and the idea is that you organize yourselves in groups to look at how you're going to respond to it, because the date of the module 5, which I don't remember when it is, you will have to present what you came up with, and we will give you also list of items that that have to be there. So basically, present your objective, present your deliverables, milestones, and the activities that you will do to communicate around the project. So you get to think about the process. Do you have any question? Are you all fallen asleep? I will.
I have somebody else has a question. How long usually it takes to prepare one grant? Okay, I guess it depends really much on which one you apply, but how much in advance usually people start applying for successful grants, not for free?
So you have how much in advance they do and how much in advance they should do it. So it really depends on the kind of grant, but if it's a big one like an ERC and so on, we advise, I think, at least 4 months, minimum 4 months in advance to really think about it. For a fellowship, it would probably be you could probably do it in 2 months. The thing is, what matters is not that much the actual amount of time you're going to spend on the writing process, but you need to let it mature, basically. So the earliest you start, the earliest you get a first draft, and the earliest you start discussing with people about your first draft, the better. At the grants office, we always recommend people to send drafts so we can comment and do as many iterations as necessary to get you through, basically. So the later you start, the less time you have to have more iterations, basically.
And also, if I may add, it also depends on when the call is open. Because it's always the calls are not, I mean, the templates. When the call opens, you will have the template, you will have the guidelines and all. So it's also, I mean, you will be dependent on this as well, to wait for the call to actually open. But you can always, plan ahead or start thinking about it. Because, for example, what Olivier has told you about the Marie Curie one, we know that every year there will be a call around about the same time. They have changed this year, but usually it's around the same time. So, you can know, like, for example, next year I want to try this, for example. So you can, you can ask with your colleagues whether someone has done this, or use a past year template, because there might not be a lot of changes, but this we should be careful about, because you really need to wait for the call to be open to have really the final template.
Yeah, and to respond to Cody. So the question is, having never written a grant before, with 18 pages worth of guidelines, where would you recommend starting with the writing? At the first point in the template, structuring and detailing your work plans on your timeline to get a better idea of how it will be divided. It's a very good question, and it's not easy to respond. I would say start really having a start outside of the template if you have the time, really to think about what you want to do and what you would need to do, and then start approaching the templates, and because it will be different things. Like in the template you will the excellence part, a big part of it is not likely to change regarding what you're planning to do. I mean, if you're talking about the state of the art and so on, the reason why you want to do the project, this could be written at any time, because in principle you know that. So there's not clear answer. I don't know if my colleagues would have a better take on this.
No.
No.
But you have to read the guideline. In any case, you have to read it because there's no point of starting something and suddenly they have changed something which is not eligible in the guidelines. So at some point, you will need to read the guidelines. But of course, like Olivier said, your project, you kind of know.
You're mute.
Oh yeah, sorry. Because your project, you already know what you're working on, and you know, by discussing with your colleagues or your supervisor, you might want to further the research in some aspects of your actual projects. So this, you actually know about it, where you want to go, but then you have to see something which fits what you want to achieve. So in any case, you will have to read the guidelines at some point.
Yeah. Other questions? We're actually on time. I thought I would spend much less time presenting. Thanks for all the questions.
Well, if we do not have any more questions, we are going to end the session. We are going to send the video to Deshmukh as the last time. He has put it on some YouTube channel, if I'm not mistaken. And one more thing, please follow the links. Deshmukh will be sending links. We will follow up on this because it's really important. The first session we had 21 people, now we have 4. So you can see that it's going down the drain. So you need to, you know, go now and already block the dates in your agenda. And of course, like Olivier said, we are going to ask you to do a small exercise for the last module after following all the different parts of drafting a project. Of course, we are not going to, no pressure in a way. It's the first time you have to produce something, so it's really no pressure. It's really to discuss with you, and maybe you will do everything super great or maybe not, but our role will be to discuss with you and pinpoint what you need to change and all. So that's my advice to you guys. And yeah, please follow the links for the other sessions. Yep.
Thank you,
Nothing
everybody.
more. Yep. So thank you all.
Bravo les